Welcome everyone to another installment of the Fall Environmental Resilience Speaker Series, jointly presented by Indiana University's Integrated Program in the Environment and the Environmental Resilience Institute. I'm Sarah Mincy. I'm the Director of the Integrated Program in the Environment and Managing Director for the Environmental Resilience Institute, and I'm so pleased you're able to join us today. Both IPE and ERI are founded on the understanding that interdisciplinary learning and research are essential to teach today's scholars and to solve today's problems, not to mention tomorrow's. So we're pleased to facilitate conversations with some of today's leading environmental resilience experts from across the disciplines to address topics from climate change to the socio-environmental challenge that are affecting our health, our communities, and our world here in Bloomington and beyond. We're grateful today to Western Ecosystems Technology for making events like this possible by supporting ERI's work and sponsoring today's event. IPE was founded in 2012 by the provost and the leadership of the O'Neill School and the College of Arts and Sciences and the School of Public Health to bring together all of the environmental and sustainability scholarship across the various schools and departments on the Bloomington campus. And ERI was founded in 2017 as a part of the IU Prepared for Environmental Change Grand Challenge. Its mission is to enhance resilience to environmental change in Indiana and beyond by accurately predicting impacts and effectively partnering with communities to implement feasible, equitable, and research-informed solutions. IPE and ERI faculty, staff, and students have worked really hard to bring together a robust set of speakers for this semester's Resilience Speaker Series. It's every other Friday at noon for the most part, except for this one exception. In 3 weeks instead of 2, we are going to be hosting Earth Charter Indiana's Tatjana Rebel. And so we're really excited about that. So mark your calendars for that event. You'll be able to find information about each talk on the ERI and IPE web pages and in regular newsletters and upcoming event notices that our organizations regularly send out. And we encourage you to sign up for our newsletters so you will get reminders about these upcoming events as well as other news and events that we publicize. Finally, logistically, we want you to be able to engage with our speaker today. So please put questions into the chat as you think of them, and we will monitor those and throughout the talk, and then we'll be able to open it up to questions at the end. And before we begin, I'd like to again recognize a couple sponsors who help make today's event possible. Our fall speaker series is sponsored by Semester 2021 Resilience, an initiative of the IU College of Arts and Sciences. And today's talk is also supported by the environmental and statistical consulting company, Western Ecosystems Technology. So at long last, please let me introduce today's speaker, Jacqueline Patterson. Jacqueline Patterson has worked as a researcher, program manager, coordinator, advocate, and activist working on women's rights, violence against women, HIV/AIDS, racial justice, economic justice, and environmental and climate justice. She is the founder and executive director at the Chisholm Legacy Project, a resource hub for Black frontline climate justice leadership. Prior to this current role, she served as the senior director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program for over 11 years. Since 2007, Patterson has served as the coordinator and co-founder of Women of Color United. Patterson served as a senior women's rights policy analyst for ActionAid, where she integrated a women's rights lens on the issues of food rights, macroeconomics, and climate change, as well as the intersection of violence against women and HIV/AIDS. Previously, she served as assistant vice president of HIV/AIDS programs for IMA World Health, providing management and technical assistance to medical facilities and programs in 23 countries in Africa and the Caribbean. Patterson served as the Outreach Project Associate for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities and Research Coordinator for Johns Hopkins University. She also served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Jamaica, West Indies. Patterson has produced an extensive list of publications on a broad array of topics, represented by this sample of titles: Jobs versus Health, An Unnecessary Dilemma, Climate Change is a Civil Rights Issue, Gulf oil drilling disaster, gendered layers of impact, and disasters, climate change, uproot women of color. Patterson holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in public health from Johns Hopkins. She currently serves on the steering committee for Interfaith Moral Action on Climate, on the advisory board for the Center for Earth Ethics, as well as on the boards of directors for the Institute of Black World, the Hive, Gender and Climate Justice Fund, the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, Greenprint Partners, Bill Anderson Fund, and the National Black Workers Center. Folks, please welcome Jackie Patterson, who I will turn the screen over to now. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you so much, and good day, everyone. I am so sorry I am not on camera. Unfortunately, if you can see, it says cannot start video. So for whatever reason, it's not our lucky day for that. But the good news is I was planning on showing slides nonetheless. So I will put those up. So you have only seen a tiny thumbprint of me pretty much throughout anyway. So it's just as well. And also I'm in an odd place. So I get to keep my mask on, which is awesome. I can live to see another day. So I'm looking forward to talking with you on this subject of resilience, particularly in the context of climate change, but also for us, climate justice is this kind of broader construct of the societal underpinnings of so many challenges. We're now sitting at the intersection of multiple converging crises, from the climate crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic to the economic crisis that has arisen from all of this, and also the racial awakening. And so for us, climate justice is about addressing those societal underpinnings that really give rise to the ways that we're all suffering from these crises, but then certain communities are on the front lines of those challenges. So when we think about this notion of resilience, we think about the intersecting ways that our social situation, our political situation, our financial situation, our economy, and so forth, and how we engage with these systems in our society, and the extent to which we are resilient in terms of being able to weather the crises, weather the storms, and come out not just surviving, but actually moving towards thriving. And so I working with a focus, as you heard, with the Chisholm Legacy Project, it's a Black resource for Black frontline climate justice leadership. In the last almost 12 years with the NAACP, working with a largely African American constituency. So that will be my orientation as I talk about resilience, because from the times that we as African Americans were brought to the US in the hulls of ships as cargo, we have had to really define resilience in some pretty extreme circumstances. From that time to today, where we can have a situation like George Floyd being brought down in the street that way and having his life snuffed just from a casual, what should have been a passing interaction in some ways with law enforcement that actually ended up taking his life. And so these are the types of circumstances that we have to rise above to be resilient, to, again, barely survive in some cases and not in others, as we saw with George Floyd, Freddie Gray, and so many others, but then also with this view towards liberation and actually thriving. So in this presentation, I'll take us through some of the systems that both challenge our resilience, the situations that we've had to be resilient through, and then also talk about some of the ways that communities are building towards institutionalizing resilience through having a just transition to this type of society that supports the well-being, life, and liberation for everyone. So if all goes well, I want to start us off with a video. I'm a little bit worried because there's a little yellow circle down here that says slow connection. So it might buffer. You can break in and let me know if it's not working for us, but meanwhile, we'll just give it a little try. I'm going to stop share for a minute and then pull it up. for us. And we'll see how that goes. Hold on. But I'll give you a little background for it while I'm pulling it up. It's the video takes place in Baytown, Texas, which is a community that is often challenged by disasters because it's in the Gulf, but it is also in the petrochemical corridor. So they have kind of a double whammy of challenge. So here we go.
The city of Baytown is made of old money, lower to middle class families, and pollution. But if you get a job at a chemical plant, you don't have time to think of a solution. I guess my brother, my uncle, and my cousins are sellouts because they went industrial instead of the drug route. Refinery city lights and pipes run along the Gulf Coast. The smoke boasts with sulfur air. It's a wonder anyone's able to take a breath. We're so used to it, we forget. Soon, the sons and daughters won't be able to drink the water. They say the first priority is the people. But the people are the ones being excluded and uprooted. Just ask Archicords, ask George Washington Carver Elementary, or ask the suburban nights. Exxon Sacrifice, AKA Brownwood neighborhood. God bless social media, but Flint ain't the only case of complexion without protection. Baytown, AKA the Dirty Bay, is surrounded by giant toxins, threatening this city in every way. We see the huge still from our window sills, make jokes as we choke. We've been possibly dying from this kind of poison oak. It's no mystery that the Black and brown communities are being targeted. Black lives matter, but not when they're expendable and making money is good for the market. Give them a fine, it's fine. They can afford it. We live with the headaches, the shortness of breath, and watery eyes. They keep building, and we pay for it. Constantly trying to heal ourselves and repel the environmental destruction. Breathe it in, then breathe out.
So the thing about that video and that situation is that the video was made in 2016. So as you see the young women wearing gloves and wearing masks, it shows that we had to be masked and gloved long before that became the norm for our society. Our communities, our air was not safe to breathe long before it wasn't safe to breathe for other people in society. Our surfaces were not safe to touch long before the surfaces weren't safe to touch for the rest of society. And so for us, this notion of resilience is against a backdrop of this constant, the constant assaults, the constant exposures, the constant chafing against any path towards resilience. So this is a little bit of what I hope to bring in terms of understanding of the situation that some folks are in when we talk about resilience. And so we as practitioners, as academics, as advocates, as policymakers, as policy advocates, et cetera, have to really recognize and understand the circumstances in which people are dwelling in order to be able to have to direct how we do our work in a way that makes sure that we are considering and lifting kind of liberation and well-being for all. So we talk about this notion of a beloved community. For way too many, it's kind of this far off notion of having a community where all the needs are met, like in the commons. People have access to clean air, clean water, uncontaminated land, safe, accessible, healthy and nutritious foods, shelter, clothes, just all the basics that so many people take for granted, don't even think about because they're just there all the time. Whereas there's other people that's all they think about, whether they're having to wear masks because of the air not being safe to breathe, having to filter their water, or not even having access to running water, as in some of the communities that I work with, and so forth and so on, where each one of these things is not something that people can take for granted. So we have this course that we're on in terms of commoditization of people, of nature, of our communities, and this is why resilience is such an uphill battle for BIPOC communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. This is a quote from Martin Luther King: "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few." So as I said before, this is our historical context, where people were enslaved and put in the hulls of ships as if they literally were cargo, where during the Middle Passage, as people were in that transatlantic passage, when people died from being in conditions that were not, not meant for human habitation. People were literally just tossed into the ocean. The bodies were just tossed into the ocean as if just like a soiled piece of tissue, just, expendable, tossed over with no ceremony, no honor, no care. And so we still see today this disposability of lives. We talk about this notion of essential work in the context of COVID-19, but we really have the systems have long considered the people to be disposable workers, whether we're starting with the slave trade, people picking cotton and having to have their babies while they're out there in the fields as if their lives don't matter. People today having, being on the front lines without the proper protection in the context of COVID-19, to people, whether it's farm workers or others, where the work is essential, but the people aren't considered to be as essential. So with that historical context, whether it's the commoditization of people or the extraction and processing of quote unquote natural resources, all kind of institutionalized by the people who are holding power and maintaining the status quo. So we see how this plays out in terms of discrimination on lines of economic status, political power, gender, education, race, immigration status. These are kind of the points of division that we have in our society that says who has power, who has access, and who doesn't. And so just reminding us of what the human rights are, because often we talk about human rights, but not much in the United States. Globally, human rights is kind of the frame of reference. In the US, people talk about civil rights at best, but human rights are not really something that we use in our kind of day-to-day governance. And so just putting these up here to remind us of what those are. Another quote from Martin Luther King. And so as we talk about the commons, and we talk about, as I said before, what those commons are and who has access and who doesn't, but then it's also, as the commons are created, who is in the front lines of the ways that we're generating the goods, services in the commons, and who's suffering from being on the front lines, but yet not even having the same level of access. We know with the affluent water crisis that we started with underinvestment, underregulated pollution from communities that were host to manufacturing industries that polluted the water, and these manufacturing industries hold such sway over our political system that they were able to keep us from having the types of policies that would protect our waterways. And so we had this underregulated pollution. And then once those same companies decided it would be cheaper for them to manufacture overseas, they pulled up stakes from these communities. And in the case of Flint, they took 85,000 jobs. So they really took away the entire economic engine for the community in one fell swoop. And so that disinvestment resulted in the vulnerability to what they imposed, which is the emergency financial manager law, which displaced the mayor and the city council, and it put in someone whose only goal was to balance the books without regard to, again, human rights and civil rights. And so we see how that played out to the poisoning and lives that are forever changed as a result of being poisoned by the cocktail of contaminants that were in that water supply. So as we talk about our energy systems, we put out this report for the NAACP, Fumes Across the Fence Line. We looked at the health impacts from oil and gas facilities on African-American communities, but it's similar also with Latino communities, with indigenous communities, with these oil and gas facilities being disproportionately in BIPOC communities and causing all kinds of harms, from respiratory to causing cancer clusters and more. This is the Cesar Chavez High School. That oil refinery is one of 5 oil refineries within a 10-mile radius of that school. And you see what's coming out of those smokestacks. So these are the kinds of air that the communities, largely Latino and African-American communities, are forced to breathe on a daily basis. We remember the BP oil drilling disaster, and this is one of the signs that someone put out on their lawn to really cry out in the David and Goliath dynamic of that situation. And this is just something that they painted in the night on the side of a BP BP gas station to really cry out again for justice. We put out this report a few years ago, Cold-Blooded: Putting Profits Before People, that looked at coal-fired power plants across the country, and they're disproportionately located in BIPOC communities, and the health harms we'll talk a little bit more about. With the coal industry also, from cradle to grave, it does harm. 76,000 coal miners have died of Black lung disease since 1968, while the National Mining Association, which consists of their very employers, has fought against the regulations that would have protected their very own workers from coal mine dust. So caring more, again, about profits than about people, even their own people, in terms of their employees. So again, essential work that they're doing to power this country, but disposable workers. Mountaintop removal, we've seen where once beautiful mountains are having their, being chopped off. So not only destroying the beauty, but most importantly, harming the communities that are surrounding. There's certain health conditions that are more proliferate in those areas because of the dust that goes all over from the blasting. And then with coal combustion, the other end of the coal-based energy production continuum, from mining to burning. When it's burning, what comes out of those smokestacks includes mercury, arsenic, lead, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, which is tied to a myriad health conditions. And then this is the Tennessee Valley coal ash spill that not only contaminated the water and wiped out a couple of species of fish, but also was so strong it actually destroyed several homes in the area. When we talk about our waste system, this is where the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster went to communities that were predominantly higher than the population in the state, people of color. POC stands for people of color in this case. And so this is just a schematic from color lines that shows where the bulk of the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster went. And it went to communities that were predominantly communities of color. Even the smaller percentages they're higher than the percentage of the representation of those communities average across the state. So, this is one of the landfills at the waste from the BP oil drilling disaster. And I should say too that BP oil drilling disaster waste included Corexit, which is banned in 90 countries, but not banned in the United States. And again, that is yet another situation because the toxic release inventory and the TSCA, which I can't remember what it stands for, but it's also a toxics kind of list. Well, actually, that's the act, the Toxic Substances Control Act. Anyway, so the lobby against these regulations is so strong, so that people can pollute with impunity, without regulations, that corrects it, even though it's banned in 90 countries, isn't banned here, because the list of banned substances is so strong, because we have folks like the American Chemical Society and other trade associations representing these industries that, again, care more about profits than people. So their goal is to keep as few things on those banned lists as possible. And so we walk around thinking that these things that are in our society, the goods and so forth, should be safe. But there's no way that we should ever rest in thinking that they are safe, because there are very well moneyed interests that keep us from knowing what's actually in these things and how safe they actually are. So this is an incinerator, so talking about the waste continuum. So from burying it to burning it, and again, with incinerators, what comes out of those is mercury, benzene, which is a known carcinogen. And again, they're disproportionately located in BIPOC communities. So it's another video I would have shown you, but I want to kind of get us through so that we can have a little bit of discussion. So even with our food systems, we have companies like Monsanto that creates Terminator seeds that only have one life cycle. And these seeds have resulted in taking over people's farms, because they're kind of predatory seeds. Like if they get into your onto your crops, then your naturally regenerative seeds will be taken over by these single cycle seeds. And Vandana Shiva has done a lot of work on how farmers in India have been committing suicide because of the impacts of these seeds. Factory farming is another issue where not only is it so harmful and barbaric for the animals, but it also causes health for the communities that are health challenges for the communities that are surrounding these factory farms. Our water systems, again, because of underregulation, we have a situation where the Red Dog Mine can violate the Clean Water Act 600 times, and yet it continues to operate because of the lack of regulations and the control that these companies have over our regulatory and our legislative systems. And so when it comes to human acts, we have, this extreme punitive system, and this whole kind of three strikes rules, where we have very little grace. But when it comes to companies, in terms of actually polluting our waterways, they can do it 600 times and still be operating. So if we really sit and rest with that, it really tells us just how wrong our society actually is. And we see how even the three strikes rule and the punitiveness of our criminal justice system is tied to this profits over people thing as well, because if people profit from incarcerating people because of the prison industrial complex. And once people are in prison, then they're subject to basically being enslaved in labor, whether it's in manufacturing labor or fighting forest fires or otherwise. So we have this contamination of water with impunity, and then we have the situation where people can't afford to pay their water bills and they have the water shut off. There's a quote from Martin Luther King where he talks about, why are people paying for water in a world that's 2/3 water? And it's true, when you have this kind of pollution with impunity that's happening in our waterways, that it costs so much more to just even clean up our water and have it be potable. And then then we have, when we know that water is necessary for life, and we have people who can have it shut off in this world in this land of plenty. Transportation and goods movement, again, people in low-income communities and BIPOC communities are more likely to be near roadway air pollution. And so these types of the ways that we have under regulation of our vehicle emissions has also been disproportionately impacting frontline communities as well, with extreme health challenges as a result of near roadway air pollution. Same with shipping channels as well, tend to more likely to be next to low-income communities, and those health impacts are significant. And so all of those exposures, the air pollution, water pollution, soil contamination, come through our bodies through respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular illnesses, like I said, cancer clusters, and so forth, and disproportionately in BIPOC communities. So we know that African-American child is 3 to 5 times more likely to enter a hospital from an asthma attack, and 2 to 3 times more likely to die of an asthma attack than a white American child. This is a family that was living next to a landfill where the landfill got into their water supply, including trichloroethylene, which is a known carcinogen. And they found out when there was a proliferation of rare forms of cancer in their family. They also found out that the animal shelter had been put on an alternate form of water when they found out about this contamination, but the family was never informed until years later. White families were informed immediately after the contamination happened. Again, the Black families weren't informed until years later. And they only were informed when they started asking questions, when all of these cancers started to appear in their communities. So as we say, the Dixon family, it's a classic case of environmental racism. This family is in front of the Navajo generating station, which is no longer operating, but it was one of 4 coal-fired power plants within a 30-mile radius of the Navajo lands, yet 70% of the people on the Navajo lands did not have electricity. So again, so many examples of where people have to be far more resilient than they should have to be. Like, those conditions should not be such a challenge to like, resilience shouldn't be a way of life, where there's so many shocks to recover from. But yet for BIPOC communities, this is too much the norm. So we talk about the pollution from energy production, and again, just like the water situation, we're on the front lines of the production and the challenges with it, but yet it's our communities that are more likely to have electricity turned off for non-payment, and it could be to fatal impacts. In the case of this New Jersey woman who, in the middle of a heat wave, had her electricity shut off for non-payment after her son had actually paid the bill off. When he found out she was having a hard time paying, he paid the bill off, but the system didn't catch up in time, and they turned off her electricity even though she needed it to breathe for her respirator. And she literally paid the price of poverty with her life in the middle of New Jersey, right next to a city where billions of dollars are passing through constantly. So these are kind of the challenges. This is the medicines of a child with asthma. This is a child looking on while another child is playing because he has asthma. He can't play like other kids. When you're living next to toxic facilities, your property values are lower. So your schools are under-resourced. So if you're having a hard time paying attention in school because lead comes out of the smokestacks, you're not able to be in school like other kids because asthma, it causes so many days of lost school. And when you're living next to those smokestacks, you're also more likely to have asthma. And then your school is under-resourced because on average, property values are 15% lower when you're living next to a toxic facility. And so when you have all of these challenges, you're most likely to not be on grade level, which then leads to this school to prison pipeline effect that we have too much for our kids. And so as we talk about climate impacts, the shifts in agricultural yields means that food insecurity that already exists is exacerbated. These are the people are more likely to access foods from a corner store, which is high in sodium, sugar, preservatives, and foods that are high in antioxidants, vitamins, nutrients, and so forth, like the picture, like what's available in the supermarket, much less at a farmer's market. When we talk about disasters, the people with poor housing stock, people who are more likely to be in floodplains, people who are less likely to have fortified levees, are the people who are, like, the disaster doesn't discriminate, but if your infrastructure isn't meant to protect you, as is the case with so many BIPOC communities, you're more likely to lose your life and certainly lose your property. So I'm skipping past some because because I want to make sure we do have time for Q&A. But again, just talking about the layers of disproportionate impact, including people who are in prisons, who were abandoned after some of these disasters. We all know the scenes from the recent Hurricane Ida, and in the global South, the infrastructure is such that when these disasters happen, it's a much stronger impact. So moving towards the inequities in response, whether it's the Red Cross or it's the ways that prisoners are used in after disaster cleanup. Again, when we talk about the prison industrial complex and people using prisoners to fight fires. And then I'm gonna skip past this. And then when we talk about intersections, the ways that narrative can be prologue to state-sponsored violence. This is on the very same day, 2 white people were getting food versus an African-American male who was getting food and from grocery stores that were untended after the disasters. But the way the Associated Press told the story, when it was 2 white people, it says 2 residents wade through chest-deep floodwaters after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. But when it was African-American male, it says a young man walks through chest-deep floodwaters after looting a grocery store. So they're literally doing the exact same thing, but the white people are just finding, they're just surviving, but this Black male is up to no good, he's looting. And so these are the kinds of narratives that lead to criminalization. These are the kind of narratives that led to people who were just looking for food and looking for their relatives unarmed being shot by police on the Danziger Bridge, and then covering up those actions. And so this is why we have this cry for Black lives to matter, that our lives aren't disposable. Our existence isn't automatically with criminal intent as the society has cast us to be. So then when we layer on gender as well, we know that whether it's the man camps and the predator economies, missing and murdered Indigenous women sexually assaulted on the pipeline, these are all the challenges that we're finding even across the BIPOC communities. The US is 4% of the global population, yet 25% of the emissions that drive climate change. Yet when people are coming seeking shelter, we put them in cages as if they are, again, up to no good, when we're the ones who are responsible for them fleeing their land. This is a quote from Warsan Shire, a Kenyan-born Somali poet. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. So, and then on top of it all, I've been having these conversations about climate grief and all the impacts of this kind of constant assaults on these communities. And so this is just from the post-Katrina situation, but again, these are constant assaults on these communities that add up. So PTSD, depression, domestic violence, general anxiety, suicide and suicidal ideation, substance abuse. All of these are lasting multiple years just after Katrina alone, not to mention the multiple assaults. And so the implications, are loss of sense of self, reduced social cohesion, and so on. So as we think about solutions, which I really want to wrap up with, we know what not to do. As Dr. Martin Luther King says, all progress is precarious, and the solution of one problem brings us face to face with another problem. The story of cap and trade. So we know that market-based solutions aren't the way to go. Clear cutting is not the way to go. Population control, when we know that, again, the US is 4% of the global population, but 25% of the emissions drive climate change. So it's not how many people, because the world is abundant with resources, is what the people do. And so a small group of people, if they're reckless in how they engage with the earth, then they're the ones who are having an outsized impact. These false technologies are also false solutions. And even as our efforts to have climate action plans and to clean up the way that we are interacting can also be, if not done right, can cause gentrification and displacement of communities. And so we know what as I've alluded to so many times throughout this presentation, that it's moneyed interests that continue to drive us on this disastrous path, and even denying that climate change is happening, and certainly stomping on our democracy. So as we think about the solutions, the real solutions, then we really talk about upholding the beloved community, moving us away from an extractive economy into a living economy that centers caring and sacredness, so ecological and social well-being, regeneration, deep democracy. So to do this, we really need to change all of our systems, because each of them are rooted in the domination, extraction, exploitation paradigm, as I hope I've well illustrated, which is why I go so deep into all of those examples, is to help us understand that these systems aren't kind of messed up systems. They're systems that are doing exactly what they're designed to do by the forefathers that actually came and murdered and displaced people to establish this place that is now called the United States, that is stolen land. And so this is literally the foundation of our Constitution and everything else that has arisen from it. And so we have to really come to terms with that real fact in order to really have, again, liberty and justice for all. So as we advance true democracy, overturning the policies that are doing exactly what they're designed to do, getting the right people in office, making sure that we're upholding leadership and advancement of women of color, and starting to be the change we wanted to see in the world, even as we do the glacier-like pace of change in our legislatures and so forth. So really getting out there and calling for justice and pushing back against moneyed interests, and linking across borders, recognizing that we can't continue to act in a vacuum in the United States, that we should act as much better global citizens. And just moving through all of that as we go towards the end here. And then, and this is rooted in strengthening local economies. A couple other videos I would have shown you if we'd had more time, but folks coming together, power without pollution, energy without injustice, people who are lifting up women's leadership and economic well-being, moving us towards energy efficiency and clean energy, starting to recognize that we need to reclaim and reestablish a connection with the earth and start to grow our own food, that we need to start to center our educational systems around educating people towards a living economy, not really throwing out the old in terms of educating people towards this false narrative around scarcity, and recognizing abundance and how do we live in harmony with each other and with the land. So moving from this waste systems of dig, burn, dump to waste systems that are reducing the amount of waste that's being generated in the first place and diverting the waste into recycling, recovering, reusing, having transportation systems that focus on the good of all in terms of mass transit, as opposed to single vehicle use. Again, sustainable housing that's built on regenerative design that focuses on everyone having a roof on their heads in this land of abundance. Ensuring that we do have water for all. Again, this world is 2/3 water, and we can do that if we just design our systems in a way that recognizes that every single one of us is valuable. Every single one of us deserves to not just survive, but to actually thrive. And recognizing that being attentive to social cohesion and how we act together as brothers and sisters, or as people across a non kind of binary, gender binary, but all of us coming together is what's critical, and recognizing that heritage and culture and celebration of the same is critical to our resilience and to our thriving. And that we need to be clear about, it's not just starting from where we are and going forward, but being clear about restorative justice, being clear about the healing that's needed in order for us to move forward together. And I will end with this kind of story that talks about how, in order to really change the system, we also have to shift the narrative, shift away from these scarcity narratives, shift away from these narratives around necessary evils, and shift towards recognizing abundance and possibilities. This quote from African quote, until the lions write their own history, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. I was watching Saturday Night Live, and they were doing the weekend update. And so they were saying, as told in local newspaper, hunter thinking deer was dead was injured as a deer jumped up and gored him. So the headline was deer attacks hunter, but then really recognizing perspective and heritage, and narrative, or as the story was told in the deer community, serial killer injured as victim fights back. And so recognizing that who tells the story is just as important, because the narrative and the perspective is critical to actual justice. And so as we advance frontline community leadership, we have to make sure that the people are in the leadership. The frontline community leadership is what is finding the solutions and really moving away from moneyed interest advancing solutions and moving towards the people advancing solutions. These are some of the principles and practices of environmental justice and movement building, including the HEMAS principles of democratic organizing. So I want to end us with this from the Marshall Islands. This woman, Catherine, she goes by Kathy, did this poem to her daughter called Dear Matafeli Pinam, and she read it at the UN, at the end of the UN climate talks in 2015, where the Paris Agreement was signed.
Dear Matafeli Pinam, you are a 7-month-old sunrise of gummy smiles. You are bald as an egg and bald as the Buddha. Your thighs that are thunder, shrieks that are lightning, so excited for bananas, hugs, and our morning walks along the lagoon. Dear Matafeli Pinam, I want to tell you about that lagoon, that lucid, sleepy lagoon lounging against the sunrise. Men say that one day that lagoon will devour you. They say it will gnaw at the shoreline, chew at the roots of your breadfruit trees, gulp down rows of your seawalls, and crunch through your island's shattered bones. They say you, your daughter, and your granddaughter too, will wander rootless, with only a passport to call home. Dear Matafeli Pinam, don't cry. Mommy promises you, no one will come and devour you. No greedy whale of a company sharking through political seas, no backwater bullying of businesses with broken morals, no blindfolded bureaucracies gonna push this mother ocean over the edge. No one's drowning, baby. No one's moving. No one's losing their homeland. No one's gonna become a climate change refugee. Or should I say, no one else. To the Carteret Islanders of Papua New Guinea and to the Taro Islanders of Fiji, I take this moment to apologize to you. We are drawing the line here. Because baby, we are going to fight. Your mommy, daddy, boo-boo, dimma, your country, and your president too, we will all fight. And even though there are those hidden behind platinum titles who like to pretend that we don't exist, that the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Maldives, and Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and floods of Pakistan, Algeria, and Colombia, and hurricanes, tidal waves, and earthquakes didn't exist, still, there are those who see us. Hands reaching out, fists raising up, banners unfurling, megaphones booming, and we are canoes blocking coal ships. We are the radiance of solar villages. We are the rich, clean soil of the farmer's past. We are petitions blooming from teenage fingertips. We are families biking, recycling, reusing, engineers dreaming, designing, building, artists painting, dancing, writing. We are spreading the word. And there are thousands out on the street, marching with signs, hand in hand, chanting for change now. They're marching for you, baby. They're marching for us. Because we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive. Dear Matafeli Pinam, you are eyes heavy with drowsy weight. So just close those eyes, baby, and sleep in peace. Because we won't let you down. You'll see.
All right. So let me just make sure something else doesn't start playing while we're talking. All right, so stop share. Awesome. Thank you. That wraps my presentation. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Jackie, that was amazing. Thank you so much for such a powerful talk. If that doesn't light a fire underneath all of us, I just don't know what will. I want to wrap things up quickly because I know you have another talk at 1 o'clock. So I wanted to just reflect on the fact that you said early on in the presentation that these communities, these BIPOC communities, should not have to have resilience be a way of life every day, right? And I was thinking about the fact that I saw on some social media recently someone explaining why we're all so tired right now in reference to the pandemic. And it talked about the concept of surge capacity, this sort of system that we have, adaptive system that we have, mental and physical, to help us deal with short-term survival, like in a natural disaster. But the problem now is that this continues on and on, right, for all of us. And so our surge capacity is being depleted. And the post was suggesting that people need to realize, that this is going on. First of all, expect less of yourselves, recognize your grief, find your community and strengths and network. And this seems very similar to what BIPOC communities face in terms of the environmental injustices that you've just outlined for us. I wonder if you can reflect on that. How can we expect these folks to continue to be resilient as it's gone on for so long, as you aptly described? And what does that mean for the rest of us as allies?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just it. I think we shouldn't expect people to continue to, to have resilience as a way of life, that we all owe it to each other and to society and to the world to make the commitments to the true systems change that we need. And I often recognize with people that it's overwhelming to think about changing our entire systems, but all it takes is for us to just do something, everything we did. We put out this thing called 20 things you can do to advance a sustainable planet. And if everybody just picked something and started doing it, it would be a start. I mean, I wasn't environmentally engaged before I became the senior director of the Environmental Climate Justice Program at the NAACP. And so it made it easier for me to have those conversations with communities, because I wasn't this kind of person who was out there doing all this before, but so I was able to really talk with folks where they are, meet them where they are. What are the issues in your communities? Okay, food insecurity. So let's build a local food system that not only provides food for that community, but it also shifts us away from, mass production of food, like the confined animal feeding operations or this or that. So everything that we do to advance us more sustainable practices is a step. They say the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So just start doing it, and it builds upon each other as well. Sorry, they're knocking at the door to try to get me to go to the thing. But that's what I would say, is that we have to focus on system change, and we have to figure out where we are in that systems change and what we can do to contribute to that forward motion.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We need to let you go so you can move on to your next talk.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you again for your time and your energy. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everyone else, we hope to see you at our next talk in about 3 weeks. Thank you and have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Take care, Jackie. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.